Starmer is now completely out of the loop as far as what the USA is going to do. But even so, you might have guessed that if he was sending warships to Iran and that action was probably imminent, then someone ought to have a look and see what Cyprus was up to, because it is, 50 mile from the Lebanese coast or whatever. So then there's the other question, of course, which is the legality of the war, and Starmer being a lawyer and being undoubtedly having his arm twisted by Ed Miliband. You cannot base your foreign policy on legalistic arguments if only the good guys follow the law.
And every day at around this time on Times Radio, we talk about the big stories of the morning. This morning, we're joined by Times columnist Cindy Yu. Good morning.
Morning.
And Rod Liddle, who writes for the Sunday Times and, of course, presents a brilliant Saturday morning programme on this very station. Morning, Rod.
Good morning.
There's lots of things to talk about as ever here. Some of the stories we've covered so far on Times Radio Breakfast. As Israel begins a new wave of strikes on Tehran and the US sinks an IRG warship, we heard from Rosita, not her real name, an Iranian protester in Tehran who told us about her view of the situation in her home city.
We're all happy that Khamenei is dead. This is a very, very great thing, and we have a very strange feeling of happiness, hope, and sadness, because he could be dead before and our lives would be spared. But what we are thankful to Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu and all the guys who are fighting for us.
Our allies in the Gulf and Cyprus are criticising the government's failure to protect British citizens in the region from Iranian missile strikes. The Defence Secretary has travelled to Cyprus, and the Times' Larissa Brown is there with him. She told us gaps had developed in the UK's defence of the island.
We've always had a warship in the Middle East region, and this is the first time since the 1980s that we haven't actually had a ship here. And the reason that they need the ships here is because the Type 45 destroyers are our only capability that can shoot down ballistic missiles. And we're obviously seeing ballistic missiles fly around in the skies in the Middle East at the moment. And there's a concern that if the base can't even protect against one single drone at the moment, what will it do with him if it was faced with a ballistic missile?
Larissa's written a piece in the paper today, well worth reading. She's spoken to naval veterans about what their view of the state of the Navy, really much echoed by some naval veterans who've been getting in touch with us this morning on this programme. We've also been discussing Gen Z with the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, after a survey shows almost a third of young men agree that a wife should obey her husband.
Slogans like toxic masculinity and all the rest are not serving us at all. I think they're the wrong approach. They have allowed to settle an impression that gender equality is a zero-sum game, that more for women necessarily means less for men, whereas a more gender equal world would actually be a better world for everyone. It would give everyone more options and more choices.
Well, let's start this morning, shall we, with a discussion about Iran. As our allies in the Gulf say we've let them down, our Navy doesn't seem to have a ship ready to help, at least not until next week, and Donald Trump has put our Prime Minister on the naughty step. Cindy, where do you think the UK's position is after the last 6 days? This conflict has been going on for 6 days now. Where do we stand?
I mean, it seems just quite meek at the moment, actually, quite confused. I was actually one of the, I think Keir Starmer should have made more of a benefit that he refused to go offensively into Iran after Iraq. He should have said, Iraq was a mistake. We have decided, we have learned from that. We're not going to start with the US on this thing. And the offensive-defensive distinction, actually, it did make sense to me. But now we're in a situation where RAF bases are not being able to be defended, and it actually just seems a bit weak. And then there's this interesting report today from The Spectator's Tim Shipman about whether or not Keir Starmer was talked out of it by a coalition of Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper, and others, so which just seems bizarre. So it's probably weakness on a global stage and actually weakness at home as well.
Rod, is that your perception? Because, one of the questions that we've been wrestling with is whether we need to reconcile ourselves to the fact that, look, we are not a global military superpower anymore. We haven't been for some time. That's through years of underinvestment. Is that just kind of where we are at now? Do we have to reconcile ourselves to that? Or are we diminished by what we're seeing over the last couple of days?
Well, we are diminished. We have to reconcile ourselves to that, but by the same token, we have to change it because it's not safe to carry on the way we're carrying on at the moment. So there's 2 points to this story, 3 maybe. One is the invasion of Iraq, as Cindy says, that was catastrophic, and that's one of the problems that has arisen from it. It made us unable really to react properly to developing international situations because of that failure. I don't think that the Prime Minister was right originally to have banned the bases from being used by the Americans, precisely for the reason that we need to protect our own people as well. In Cyprus, he should have been able to see that, and that would have meant that there wouldn't have been a change in policy, which has come to characterise Sir Keir Starmer's government. The other point, the important point, is defence spending. It doesn't matter how often Sir Keir Starmer says we're going to spend more on defence and cozies up to Donald Trump by saying, yes, we will pay our whack. We're still paying 2.3%. In 1961, we were paying 7%. And I would argue that the world is every bit as dangerous now for Britain, partly as a consequence of the way the Americans behave, as it was in 1961. We really have to change our priorities. I think, we've all kind of sniggered a little bit at the influencers in Dubai being shelled, but in a sense we also have that sense of entitlement and have had it for too long, that everything's all right, nothing can touch us, we're okay, we're safe. Well, we're not.
Cindy, I wanted to ask you about that point that Rod makes there, that the peace dividend, when you speak to people, especially former Conservatives, they often cite this idea of a peace dividend. We thought we were safe, we have invested in what we thought we needed, but maybe not what we think we might need for the future. Do you see any signs of that changing?
Well, this is the moment to change, and I think we are in a moment at a crossroads where you could change or you might just not, and you actually continue that decline. So I really don't know what will happen, but I think now people are asking the question, and it's the right question to ask, and maybe we will choose the right thing, but it takes a lot of sacrifices. Rod mentioned the defence spending in the 60s. The dividend has come because we haven't needed to spend on defence so much in the past. Now it's slightly too late. So then going into the future, what are we going to, that extra 5% of GDP, what are we going to take that away from? What government spending is going to be cut to accommodate that, and what would that mean for British lives here? We have had such a dividend, and we're children of summer in many ways after the Cold War. And actually in the UK, as an empire that has declined in the last 100 years, we've been pretty good, because actually America has been this kind of big brother with a nuclear umbrella and all that sort of stuff. But now this big brother isn't playing very nicely, and we don't know if we can count on them anymore. And there's going to be a lot of sacrifices, basically.
Rod, who do you blame for this? Blame is not necessarily going to help us in this current situation, but it might help us avoid it happening again in future. Where do you think the blame lies?
I think it's both parties over the last 30 to 40 years. I think there was some genuine reason to be happy in 1989, 1990, when the wall came down, when the Soviet Union dissolved before our eyes, that we were moving towards a world which was more peaceful. Now, we made many missteps during that decade. One of them was to antagonise Russia to the degree that we now have Vladimir Putin in charge of the country. We could have been far, far more inclusive and perhaps accepted Russia into NATO. But leaving all that aside, we've all become assuaged and cosseted by peace and affluence. The year I talked about, 1961, we were all much worse off in 1961 than we are now, and yet we're still able to pay 7% towards our of our GDP towards defence. So it's something which has gripped everybody pretty much. including some of the defence chiefs. There was no great outcry when defence began to be run down in 89, 90. We were all infected with this kind of false sense of optimism, which, and Francis Fukuyama saying that this was the end of history, democracy would prevail, etc., etc., etc. We just have to... Perhaps we should pay fewer people who claim they're suffering from anxiety. I'm suffering from anxiety, Kate. It's terrible anxiety. But it's stuff like that where we've raised the bar on what we can do for our people, our civilians at home, and then neglected their protection when it comes to threats from abroad.
Can I come in with just a slightly different rephrasing of the question as well? I mean, the situation with Iran at the moment, I don't know if us having more defence spending in order to hit Iran is necessarily a consolidation or a projection of British power. Getting stuck into the Middle East again, I'm not sure it's going to work out for Donald Trump, actually. I'm not sure it's going to be good for American hard power in the medium term. So in some ways, this kind of... It's defensive insofar as America started this and Iran is now hitting back at British bases. And British bases must be protected. But to kind of go into that military operation would not have been a defensive measure. And I don't think British power should be measured by that way anyway. So I guess what I'm saying is that there should be non-military ways to measure British power as well.
But the flip side of that, Cindy, I think, is that there's also this ability of how competent we are to deal in the world of the military in an unsafe world. Because you don't have to... Yeah. I think the danger is we conflate two arguments here. One is Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. This war's not a very good idea, which I think is a very, very plausible argument. And therefore, Starmer was either right or wrong to support him. That's one argument. The central argument is we knew what Donald Trump was going to do. We didn't until Tuesday have a meeting about whether to send one of the 6 destroyers we have.
That's right.
That's right. And 3 of them are in dry dock. We don't even have 6 destroyers. We have 3, and one of them is going to get there sometime in a week and a half's time. And I wonder, actually, when you're coming in there, that you can have a row about Trump, and I actually agree with precisely what Cindy's saying. It is a war in the Middle East sponsored by Donald Trump a good thing that we want to be part of? Absolutely, you can make the case no. But are we actually competent enough to know that it's coming and make the right decisions to make sure that we're not in compromised as a result of it?
Yeah.
No, well, that's exactly right. And the problem being, of course, that through his actions and decisions in the past, Starmer is now completely out of the loop as far as what the USA is going to do. But even so, you might have guessed that if he was sending warships to Iran and that action was probably imminent, then someone ought to have a look and see what Cyprus was up to, because it is, 50 miles from the Lebanese coast or whatever. So then there's the other question, of course, which is the legality of the war, and Starmer being a lawyer and being undoubtedly having his arm twisted by Ed Miliband. You cannot base your foreign policy on legalistic arguments if only the good guys follow the law. And we've seen over the last 25 years that the bad guys do not follow the law. And we were the bad guys, of course, in 2003. But Russia in Crimea, Russia in Ukraine. If only one side follows the law, then there's no point in following the law.
It's a point that many people are wrestling. We're about to talk very briefly about China. Before we do, MPs dancing while war is going on. Cindy Yu, do you care? I
really couldn't care less. People spend too much time on Twitter.
Rod Liddle, do you want to park some anger at that in our direction?
No, I think they should dance, and preferably naked.
You do not mean that. Take that back, Rod Liddle. Rod Liddle, take that back right now.
Okay, I take it back. It's not a thought people want at 9:15, is it?
Or indeed.
I'm not sure it's what people want ever, really. But